Hello and welcome to using the Catholic curriculum standards to meet multiple national standards and benchmarks, specifically benchmarks 2.5, 2.7, 7.1, 7.2, and 7.5. My name is Dr. Denise Donahue, and I am co-author of the Catholic curriculum standards and the director of the Catholic Education Honor Roll at the Cardinal Newman Society. Our objectives for this next 35 minutes or so will focus on how to improve the Catholic identity of your school by using the Catholic curriculum standards to address standards 2 and 7 of the national standards and benchmarks for effective Catholic elementary and secondary schools. To more effectively utilize your time and to apply what you're learning today, take just a minute and pause this video to locate a set of standards that you currently use, preferably from English language arts, mathematics, history, or science. I'll set aside some time to allow you to analyze and compare your set of standards to the Catholic curriculum standards during this presentation. And hopefully you'll find an area or two where this information will help you exceed some of your benchmarks and simultaneously improve the Catholic identity of your school. Some of you might already be familiar with the national standards and benchmarks for effective Catholic elementary and secondary schools, as many dioceses are requiring these standards and benchmarks as frameworks for their accreditation process. You might not be as familiar with the Catholic curriculum standards, which were released by the Cardinal Newman Society in 2016 as a response to numerous inquiries as to what a set of specifically Catholic standards might look like. If you like, you can copy and paste the link provided to download a copy of the standards to review as you work through this presentation. You can select a PDF, Word, or Excel format, whatever works best for you and is easiest for integration into your existing standards. The Catholic curriculum standards were derived primarily from the church documents on education, books and articles on Catholic and liberal arts education, and the assistance of content experts from the colleges and universities represented in the Cardinal Newman Guide to Choosing a Catholic College. Among these contributors were Anthony Esselin, Joseph Pierce, Chad Pecknall, and Father Robert Spitzer, just to name a few. The Catholic curriculum standards are a set of complementary or supplemental standards. They are not a full set of standards for each subject. They are comprised of primarily 3 types of standards: content knowledge, or what students might be expected to know; student performance, what students can do or skills they can perform; and dispositions, or a relatively stable inclination to approach learning and life in a particular way. A sample content standard is to recognize Christian and Western symbols and symbolism. A performance standard is to use imagination to create dialogue between characters in a story. And a disposition is to demonstrate respect and solicitude to individual differences in the classroom. The dispositional standards are going to be important for our purposes when we get to the end of this presentation and discuss benchmark 7.5 and the effective dimensions of learning. We'll begin with looking at Standard 2. An excellent Catholic school adhering to mission provides a rigorous academic program for religious studies and catechesis in the Catholic faith, set within a total academic curriculum that integrates faith, culture, and life, specifically benchmark 2.5 and 2.7. Benchmark 2.5. Faculty use the lenses of Scripture and the Catholic intellectual tradition in all subjects to help students think critically and ethically about the world around them. What is the Catholic intellectual tradition? The national benchmarks and standards in their glossary define the Catholic intellectual tradition as primarily a process of continuous dialogue between faith and cultures, which reflects 2 essential characteristics of the Christian and especially the Catholic understanding of the human experience. Faith necessarily seeks understanding, and all intellectual inquiry leads eventually to questions of an ultimate nature that invite a faith response. The glossary definition provides both a formal response or a responsive process, or the how, and a material response, or the what. The how is a continuous dialogue between faith and cultures, and the what is the seeking of understanding, which can, quote, eventually be elevated to see the higher truth of all things, end quote. To simplify this, it is faith seeking understanding, which eventually leads to truth with a capital T. There's no specific canon of literature, history, science, etc. prescribed, But in this definition, the process of seeking absolute truth in all subjects is implied, as is the requirement for students to think both critically and ethically about the world around them. Take a minute and review your set of standards for direct reference to finding the truth of a thing. You will find the Catholic intellectual tradition's pursuit of truth is embedded within the Catholic curriculum standards. For example, you can see from these samples, the pursuit of truth is made explicit in all 4 subject areas. As a hallmark of Catholic education, truth is a perennial construct that the human person has always sought, and which for a Christian can ultimately be found in the person of Jesus Christ, who is truth incarnate. A simple philosophical definition, though, of truth is the correspondence of the mind with reality. The human person was made for truth. He is always in pursuit of truth, of what Father Spitzer might call complete intelligibility. When presented with the answer, the person always vocalizes another question, but why? In his desire to attain perfect intelligibility. Pause the video and look again through your chosen set of standards for the purposeful integration or discussion of the pursuit of truth within your content material, your instructional approach, your lesson plans, or essential questions. Where do you purposefully focus on this aspect of the Catholic intellectual tradition? You'll also find within the definition of Catholic intellectual tradition the concept of the coherence of faith and reason, that neither has to be opposed to the other, and that, in fact, when taken out to their extreme on any subject, that faith and reason will complement each other, since, as Catholics, we believe God created all things, and as such cannot be contradicted. The Catholic curriculum standards have 2 very specific standards about the concept of faith and reason. The first standard, a K6 science content standard, simply asks the student to describe the unity of faith and reason. The 7th through 12th grade science standard requires the student to first explain the unity of faith and reason as a basic lower level Bloom's cognitive requirement, and then asks that the student promote the unity of faith and reason, which is a higher end Bloom's affective behavior. A sample history standard asks the student to explain how beliefs about God or one's faith affects their behavior, which includes an element of reason. To address the second half of benchmark of helping students think critically and ethically, here's a sample of 2 history standards where students are required to explain how religious and moral knowledge are requisite for understanding human grandeur and the drama of human activity throughout history, and to elevate how history is not a mere chronicle of human events, but rather a moral and metaphysical drama having supreme worth in the eyes of God. The last standard is an effective standard that requires teachers to assist students to grow in their faith, to understand the glory and dignity of human reason as a gift from God and a reflection of Him in whose image and likeness we are made. With just these standards alone, if properly implemented, schools can effectively address or exceed benchmark 2.5. In benchmark 2.7, we find the requirement that the theory and practice of the Church's social teachings are essential elements of the curriculum. 4 of the 7 pillars of Catholic social teaching are explicit standards in the Catholic curriculum standards. Catholic social teaching concepts are primarily addressed in history and science. In the first history standard, IS 21, we read, students will be able to evaluate the concept of subsidiarity. In IS 22, analyze the concept of solidarity. IS 23, compare the right to own private property with the universal distribution of goods. IS 24, the dignity of work and the rights of workers. In IS 25, the common good, and so forth. If you are working with a set of history or science standards, you might want to take a minute and find any mention of Catholic social teaching within those standards, and then, if appropriate, you can slide a few of these standards easily into your existing set using either the Word or Excel downloads. Moving on to Standard 7, we read, an excellent Catholic school has a clearly articulated, rigorous curriculum aligned with relevant standards, 21st century skills, and gospel values, implemented through effective instructions. 3 particular benchmarks can easily be attained or exceeded by using the Catholic curriculum standards. 7.1, which looks to a rigorous and coherent sequence of academic courses based on standards rooted in Catholic values. 7.2, the integration of the religious, spiritual, moral, and ethical dimensions in all subject areas. And 7.5, intentionally addressing the affective dimensions of learning, such as intellectual and social dispositions, relationship building, and habits of mind. So in benchmark 7.1, we're looking at the curriculum adheres to appropriate delineated standards and is vertically aligned to ensure that every student successfully completes a rigorous and coherent sequence of academic courses based on the standards and rooted in Catholic values. The Catholic curriculum standards were created using graduated levels of cognitive complexity as well as complexity of content. This is evidenced in these two samples, one from history and the other from science. The first sample of history shows the same demand for level of thinking, identify, yet adds more content to identify in the older grades. K6 is identifying motivating values, whereas 7 through 12 demands identifying motivating values, philosophies, and theologies that inform particular societies. The second sample of science uses a higher Bloom's thinking requirement, moving from describing to elevating the relationship between God, man, and creation. Benchmark 7.2, standards are adopted across the curriculum and include integration of the religious, spiritual, moral, and ethical dimensions of learning in all subjects. The Catholic curriculum standards are Catholic standards designed to complement an existing set of standards educators have already chosen for their schools. Specifically, Catholic themes of the primacy of the human person, care for creation, the unity of faith and reason, the ardent pursuit of truth, the championing of virtue and moral formation, and the purposeful inclusion of opportunities to delight in beauty and wonder, to purposefully develop the aesthetic faculty of the soul, are found within all four subject areas. Each of these themes relates to the integration of religious, spiritual, moral, and ethical dimensions of learning in all subjects. First, to look at the rigor of the standards. Helping our students to grow in virtue is not an easy thing to do. It takes time to engage the will and orient the heart and intellect to the good, whether that good is docility to learn or pious love for Christ's presence in the Eucharist. Sometimes our students learn and are formed in spite of our planned efforts, and this is where we make room for the Holy Spirit. Fulfilling the formation that we're called to do in Catholic education requires professional knowledge, creativity, time, and inspiration to present lessons and provide opportunities for students to experience and reflect on their own personal values and beliefs. Standards such as value the human body as the temple of the Holy Spirit might have previously been a hidden part of the Catholic school's curriculum under the adage of, well, this is just how we do things in our school. Teachers taught informally through interaction and care of students and with each other. Attaining the last standard of exhibiting humility at knowing that as a human being, man can only grasp a portion of the truths of the universe, takes being exposed to discussions of the infinite and vastness of the mathematical universe and God's hand in it, something teachers themselves will need to be exposed to and understand. Once students see the mathematics inherent in the cosmos, it will be hard for them to ever unsee it. And the middle standard, to develop lines of inquiry as developmentally appropriate to understand why things are true and why they are false, is thinking creatively and outside the box in elementary school while remaining within the boundaries of truth. 7.5 looks at the area that the Catholic curriculum standards seem to address the most, the affected dimension of learning, or dispositions as we call them, as well as the area that encompasses the habits of mind. Each of the four subject areas within the curricular standards include dispositional standards. When they were originally written, we actually called them affective standards. When analyzing church documents and others on Catholic education, it became quite obvious to us early on that the church was concerned about the total formation of the student and not as much about how to necessarily teach English or science. The church recognizes as valid all the numerous instructional approaches, especially those coming from the religious teaching orders, but it does focus strongly on the fact that Catholic schools should teach students the importance of searching for truth and the means of doing so. In the religious dimension of education, we read teachers are to develop in them, the students, the ability to make correct use of their judgment, will, and affectivity, to promote in them a sense of values, to encourage just attitudes and prudent behavior, and a strengthening of their moral character. In the subject area of English, there are a total of 15 dispositional standards out of 60, or 1/4. In history, there are 12 out of 59, or 1/5. In science, 9 out of 44, or again 1/5. And in mathematics, 14 out of 30, or almost 1/2, are dispositional standards. Because of the emphasis on student formation, it was easy to identify and categorize from church documents the particular dispositional themes. These themes include demonstration of Catholic moral virtues, ardent pursuit of the truth of things and the rejection of relativism, value of the human body as a temple of the Holy Spirit, dignity of the human person and primacy of care and concern for all stages of life, care and concern for the environment as part of God's creation, appreciation of the beauty of well-crafted prose and poetry, historical artifacts and cultures, the order of creation and the proportion, radiance, and wholeness present within mathematics, and the appreciation for the power of literature, the story of history, and the discoveries of science and how through interaction with them, one can identify and choose the personal and collective good. Here we see samples of effective dispositions within the standards. The verb exhibit indicates valuing, or a level 3 out of 5 on a Crothwall taxonomy, which I will explain next. The verb advocate is at the highest level, or level 5. And share, as used here, is in the sense of advocating, so also a level 5. The Crothwall taxonomy guides teachers in the formation of attitudes, beliefs, and values. For instance, a teacher who wants to form students in the virtue and value of patience might first explain to students that they must be patient and raise their hand in order to be called on to speak. Students orient themselves to tune into the teacher's instruction or receiving and watch as others patiently raise their hands to be called on next to speak. The student then raises his hand and waits to be called on to speak, which is responding, and the student is called on and speaks. The student then realizes that raising one's hand and being patient works, or valuing, so begins to use the system more frequently. The student recognizes the justice inherent in being patient and raising one's hand so that all or most students in the class are able to participate, thus organizing their value system. Then the student sees value in patience and waiting to be called on and consistently uses this system and is characterized as demonstrating patience. When a new student enters the class, the experienced student instructs him or her in the procedure of waiting and raising one's hand to be called on. Within this graduation of value formation is a set of verbs which align to the graduating levels. These characteristic verbs are used within the dispositional standards as shown in the previous slide. They indicate and demand a different level of affinity toward the value being formed, such as advocating for the pursuit of understanding for its own sake and the intrinsic value or discovery of the true and the beautiful, demands that a student's allegiance to a deeper understanding of the nature of the human person who is made with an intellect to think and a will to choose. Which brings us to the habits of mind. Many of you may be knowledgeable about the Habits of Mind program created by Alan Costa and Ben Akalik. Benchmark 7.5 doesn't specifically direct a school to using this particular program, but because of the similarity and prominence of the program in education circles, these 16 habits of mind are generally the first thought of for both accreditors and school administrators attempting to implement this benchmark. I was able to review these habits of mind and compare them to the Catholic standards as well as to traditional intellectual virtues. From this crosswalk, you can see where the standards cover the 16 habits of mind if a school uses all the Catholic curriculum standards. Many of these habits of mind can also be addressed through a school's virtue formation program. For instance, the habit of mind of taking responsible risks equates to prudence. Finding humor would be affability. Thinking interdependently is circumspection. Remaining open to continuous learning is docility. Managing impulsivity equates to the cardinal virtue of temperance, and persisting to the virtue of fortitude. If Catholic schools are already working with a solid virtue-based formation program, many of these habits of mind will already be addressed. I would also insist that if a school institutes the 16 habits of mind, that these 3 additional Catholic habits of mind be included. First, that faith is also a way of knowing. In study after study on why young people are leaving the church, we find it's because of an ardent emphasis on empiricism and science as the only way of knowing the truth about something. It's the backlash to the dictatorship of relativism coined by Pope Benedict XVI. If anything can be true, then the only way to find real truth is if we can see it and measure it. What we are fighting so strongly for in Catholic education is the religious freedom to include our faith-based perspective in all areas of our school operations, most especially our curriculum. Faith is one of the 3 theological virtues which finds its home in a Catholic or Christian school. Faith is the trust we have in something we do not see, based on the authority and credibility of the source, which is generally a person. An example of human faith is to believe that Alaska exists without ever having been there. Faith becomes supernatural when we are disposed to it through the sacraments and grace, and the matter is based on divine revelation from God Himself. For example, while we have not seen the eternal kingdom, heaven, we believe that it exists because of divine revelation. In Catholic education, we believe truth precedes knowledge and proceeds from God. We believe the human intellect is ordered to truth, and reason allows the intellect to rise above knowledge and experience to better know God and His ways. We read from St. John Henry Newman that the essence of education is cultivation of the intellect for its own sake. He argued that education should cultivate a philosophical habit of mind that reasons upon knowledge rather than simply accumulating information for experience and creatively expressing one's feelings and desires. He believed that education should teach the student to ascend above knowledge to new levels of understanding by the right use of reason. He wrote, quote, "In order to have possession of truth at all, we must have the whole truth, and no one science, no 2 sciences, no one family of science, nay, not even all secular science is the whole truth." End quote. The habits of mind prioritize experience and self-expression, with emphasis on accuracy and continual learning. Yet they lack the explicitness of teaching the student how to reason well, which is necessary if one is to arrive at an ultimate truth rather than multiple self-fulfilling ones. Thus, the use of methods that aid in correct reasoning, such as guiding students to seek knowledge from sound testimony, identifying first principles, causes, and composition of ideas, asking about essence, classifying, using analogical thinking, communicating with proper and eloquent language, discerning the unity of knowledge, and even the memorization of facts, names, and dates in order to connect knowledge across time and geographical space are all methods that might be used to help the student reason well. The use of the philosophical concepts of truth, beauty, and goodness can also be used. These show the attributes of things and facilitate our thinking to a higher order. Which brings us to the 3rd additional Catholic habit of mind, the valuing and seeking of the transcendent. Pope Francis asked that, quote, "For me, the greatest crisis of education in the Christian perspective is being closed to transcendence. We are closed to transcendence. It is necessary to prepare hearts for the Lord to manifest Himself, but totally, namely, in the totality of humanity, which also has this dimension of transcendence." End quote. A specific charge for Catholic educators is to teach to the transcendent, something government schools cannot do. From the Catholic school we read, "The integral formation of the human person, which is the purpose of education, includes the development of all the human faculties of the students, together with preparation for professional life, formation of ethical and social awareness, and becoming aware of the transcendental and religious education." The purposeful inclusion of the transcendentals of truth, beauty, and goodness in the Catholic curriculum standards assist in this. At this point, you might want to stop the video and compare your set of standards to the Catholic curriculum standards, specifically looking at whether your standards require students to identify faith as a valid way of knowing, whether your standards instruct students in a method of proper reasoning, and where and when your content and questioning allow students to move beyond a discussion of the here and now to that of the beyond. And now we come to implementing the standards. There are many different ways that schools and dioceses have gone about implementing Catholic curriculum standards. Here's a sample of a curriculum renewal cycle from the Diocese of Owensboro, where the Catholic standards were implemented into the science standards during its renewal cycle. This systematic review of current standards for their emphasis on Catholicity seems to ease the transition to new standards for many teachers. Some schools and dioceses might instead choose to implement the general standards, or the first 4 or 5 standards in each subject area, emphasizing the overlaps between them, such as the transcendental of truth, the transmission of a Catholic worldview, and the dignity of the human person. Here's a sample from Owensboro's updated science standards. There's a purposeful inclusion of Catholic content here with the standard to describe the relationships, elements, underlying order, harmony, and meaning in God's creation. Three dispositional standards are included in the Diocese of Joliet's English Language Arts Renewal for 6th grade. Share beautifully told and well-crafted works, especially those with elements of unity, harmony, and radiance of form. Delight and wonder through reading aloud or listening to creative sound and healthy stories and poems and plays. Share the beauty and cadence of poetry for its impact on human sensibilities and formation of the soul. And there is one writing standard included to use language as a bridge for communication for the betterment of all involved. The Diocese of Grand Rapids chose to adapt several of the Catholic curriculum standards for their particular needs. There's no requirement to use all the standards, especially if you already have similar standards in place. The point of implementing the standards is to more purposefully integrate Catholic content and dispositions which might not already exist to strengthen the Catholic integrity of your school's program and the formation of your students. You will find additional educator resources on the Cardinal Newman Society website at the web address on this slide. Resources include sample unit and lesson plans for each subject area, assessment methods, a taxonomy for questioning based on the transcendentals to help students ascend thinking beyond the transfer of knowledge from subject to subject, diocesan examples of implementation, and teacher formation readings. Feel free to email me at ddonahue@cardinalnewmansociety.org or call 703-367-0333, extension 111. If you have any questions or need assistance with implementation, I will be happy to do an online webinar for your principals or for a group of superintendents. In today's political climate, the more our schools exemplify Catholicity in all aspects of the school's operational program, the better chance they have at protecting and safeguarding against possible legal implications, addressing the required accreditation benchmarks, and offering a more authentic Catholic program. Thank you for your time, and God bless.